Bowman was behind it all. She was behind the scheme that stole thousands of dollars from Rock's World in 2012. She was behind the robbery that left Haley Floyd sobbing on the ground. And she was behind the blackout that enabled the escape of Cameron Poole and caused the murder of Winston Thomas. Bowman was behind it all because Bowman planned it all. At the beginning of today's trial, my co-counsel Jasmine Stein told you that we were going to prove to you today that the defendant, Whit Bowman, is guilty of theft, robbery in the first degree, and felony murder. But there might be one question still left in your mind. What about Poole? How can the defendant be guilty if it was Poole that held the knife to Haley's face? How can the defendant be guilty if it was Poole that handed out those fake bracelets? Well, there's a very simple answer to that question. It's called complicity. And in the state of Midlands, complicity is a legal term that means you can be guilty for the crimes of another person if you intentionally solicit the other person, counsel the other person, or aid the other person in the commissioning of that crime. In other words, if you help create, commit, or complete the crime, you are guilty of the crime. In a few moments, the defense is going to come up here, and they're going to tell you many things. But one thing they're going to tell you, at least try to tell you, is that the state hasn't proven intent. But members of the jury, the state doesn't have to try and manufacture the intent of the defendant because it's the defendant herself that makes her intent in these crimes plain as day. It's the defendant's actions and it's the defendant's words that show Bowman was behind it all from the very start. Now let's begin with the first charge, that is theft by deception. In order to satisfy theft, the state had to prove to you today that the defendant and her co-conspirator Cameron Poole stole $500 or more from Rock World using some sort of scheme. Now the scheme was simple, and using the testimony of J.C. Longstreet, the park's owner, and the testimony of Buttons Conroy, who visited the park while the scheme was ongoing, we understand exactly how it operated. You see, Poole, who was the ticket booth operator for that season, when a customer would come and pay cash for a $35 World Tour wristband, he would instead ring in that purchase as a $20 regular wristband. He would pocket $15 for himself and the defendant and put $20 into the cash register. Now, in order to fool the park system of accounting, he would discard one regular band so that the profits in the cash register and the records from the tickets matched. In order to satisfy the customer, he would hand them one fake World Tour wristband so that they got what they thought they had purchased. Deception was clearly present. But how much were they making? More than $500? Well, you heard the testimony of the park's owner, J.C. Longstreet, that the discrepancy between the number of World Tour wristbands actually present in the park and the number of World Tour wristbands that their record of sales indicated meant that there were hundreds of fake wristbands in the park. Now, $15 of profit per fake wristband, that's over several $1,000s that the defendant and his co-conspirator were making over the summer of 2012. More than 500? More than 500. Well, what specifically connects the defendant to this scheme? Well, motive? It's not even a question. You heard the defendant went to her boss looking for a raise. And when she found out that that wasn't an option, she resorted to other methods. The theft scheme. Tyler Hardman took the stand today and told you that she heard the defendant tell her co-conspirator that Bowman had a few ideas for how Poole could get what Longstreet owed him. That is solicitation. And after the scheme had already taken form, the defendant exposed her participation in the scheme when she expressed worry that park management had caught on to their fake bracelets. And when Cameron acted surprised at this news, she calmed him down by telling him that she had a plan. Members of the jury, that is involvement. And the plan that Bowman mentioned, well, it's the robbery against Haley Floyd that caused the murder of Winston Thomas. You see, in order to make it look as though Bowman was not involved in the crime, in order to guarantee Poole's escape from the park, they had to stage a robbery. And once this robbery occurred, of course, Poole had to flee the park. fleeing the robbery itself. So after Cameron Poole held up Katie Floyd with a knife and threatened her into giving him all the contents of the cash register on that night of August 30th, 2012, he had to flee the park. The front gate, we heard, was guarded by Winnie Thomas, so that wasn't an option. The rest of the park was guarded by a 15-foot fence. The only other option for Cameron Poole to flee the park was the off-limits access door in the back of the Tunnel of Terror. The defendant needed to be in control of that ride that night, so she could unlock the door, prop it open, and kill the lights just as Poole slipped away. Billy Isaacs told you today that the defendant came over to her on August 30th 7 or 8 times, pleading 3 of those times for Billy to just surrender the controls of that Tunnel of Terror ride, and finally going so far as to lie to Billy that she could leave with full pay if she only hand over the ride. The defendant begged and the defendant lied because the defendant needed to be behind those controls on that night. Members of the jury, if that's not intent, then I don't know what is. Finally, we heard the chronological events of that night. Cameron Poole committed the robbery. He was being chased through the park by Winnie Thomas. Mr. Thomas fired his gun. A minute passed. The two entered the Tunnel of Terror. And just as Winnie was going